We are happy to be joined, as we will every Wednesday at 10:30, by the great Tyson Alger from the I-5 corridor and now Lookout Eugene Springfield. Tyson, hello, friend. Are we ready for real college football to start this weekend?
I think we are. I've spent the last few weeks coming on here and being on my website and trying to predict what's going to happen, but I have no idea. So I'm really ready to actually get to see what some of these players look like and have a little bit of proof of concept there.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, so let's let it rip, boys. I'm ready to see some guys hit each other.
Yeah, did week 0 feel like the worst tease of all time? Because man, I watched some really bad football in week 0.
Yeah, there was some rough ones. There was a couple. There was a rough one locally too, but I don't think we need to get into that one. But yeah, I've never understood the week 0 designation. Just say it's week 1.
Yeah,
and,
who cares?
Who cares? I don't think it's putting your slate of games on a very high pedestal if you're calling it week 0.
Well, let's dive right into this. Danny and I were just talking in the previous segment kind of about the youth of Oregon and where that sits in kind of comparison to the other teams that have national championship aspirations. Is the youth something that we could see going forward as kind of a staple in Oregon? Do you think it's a one-off this year? And is it a positive or a negative going into the season?
Yeah, I mean, there's pros and cons to it. I mean, there's a certain security when you're going into a season when you have a Bo Nix or a Dylan Gabriel at quarterback, and you kind of know what you're going to get out of them because they've played more college football than anybody else in the country. So that's significantly different when you bring in somebody like Dante Moore, who has 5 starts under his belt and sat the last year behind Dylan Gabriel. And obviously there's a lot of other kind of young, unproven players across the roster too. But we spend so much time on the Oregon beat celebrating what the Ducks do on the recruiting trail, celebrating what they do in the this is kind of the end extent of that is you're going to have a lot of younger guys who have developed over the last year, maybe last 2 years, who are now maybe not household names yet, but then you go back and look and go oh man, all of these were top 100 players when they came in. Or, with Dante, yes, we haven't seen a ton of production yet, but I've seen the ball come out of that dude's hands, and there's a lot of potential there. So I think as we move forward, there's going to be kind of some cycles to this because you're going to have this year's roster, and then a lot of these names are going to be familiar guys next year. But I just think that Oregon's finally kind of hit a little bit of an equilibrium where, yes, you're still very active in the transfer portal, but you're getting a lot of guys that are coming up from within the system from all those great recruiting classes that are going to start kind of making a mark here. And one thing that Lanning keeps harping on year in and year out is if you're young enough, if you're good enough, you're old enough to play. And I think this is the year where you really start to see some of those guys from the last couple of years of recruiting kind of make their mark.
Well, Tyson, speaking of those guys, who are we looking at? I mean, on the transfer side of things, on the offensive side of the ball, obviously the big name, that people I think are going to recognize is Mekhi Hughes, the running back from Tulane. But you have 2 transfers on the offensive line, and then defensively in the interior, you've got Bear Alexander, and then a back end, you've got Dylan Thieneman. Those are the kind of guys that we know and have been productive and kind of done what they've done at previous stops. And for all intents and purposes, are plug and play. Who are some of the other guys, either transfers or redshirt freshmen or sophomores that are kind of vying for depth spots that we're going to see pop in early against Montana State?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to go to the transfer route, and I know this isn't a young up-and-coming guy, but I'm really curious to see what Malik Benson looks like, the Florida State transfer at wide receiver, just because I don't think he was coming in to be Oregon's number 1 receiver when he announced the transfer over, but obviously you've had some injuries and attrition there, so I want to see how he fits in. When you're looking on the offensive line, this guy's not necessarily a super young guy, but Amari Washington is a guy up the middle who has been just drawing a ton of praise this fall, and I know Bear Alexander is kind of the name next to him that's getting a lot more pub, and understandably so considering Bear's pedigree. But I think Amari Washington is just going to be a tank for the Ducks up the middle, and you kind of saw how important that can be for a team last year when they brought in Derek Harmon, and he ended up being a first-round draft pick for them a few months later. So, yeah, I mean, it's sprinkled all around the roster. If you look at the cornerbacks, having a guy like Jaleel Florence coming back from injury, he was a very highly rated recruit 3 or 4 years ago when he came in, and he missed most of last year due to injury, but he's one of several talented and that are going to be competing for position. So yeah, I mean, you can kind of go all up and down the depth chart, but there's like a good mixture of transfer guys that were brought in to compete, but then just like a whole host of kind of that redshirt freshman, sophomore, redshirt junior territory of guys who are ready to contribute.
Let's get into this Montana State game, and then we'll take a little break and come back and keep you on. And I got some funny Lanning questions. Well, maybe not funny, but polar opposite Lanning questions for you too. But let's talk about this Montana State game. What are we just kind of looking at the overall performance of the squad? Are we looking at the O-line, wide receiver rooms? Like, what are you going to be looking at specifically in this game? Like, because for me, I feel sometimes I kind of, against these quote unquote patsies, I know Montana State is highly regarded in their level, but you kind of just want to see how teams play as a whole. Is that the truth for you, or are you still looking at certain kind of departments?
Yeah, I think it's hard to like go department by department when you're playing in one of these games. I mean, obviously Montana State is a very talented team at the level that they play at, but if you get into the talent discrepancy between the two rosters, it's not remotely close. So I think it's hard to kind of go based off of individual matchups there. What I want to see is just like cohesion. I want to see a team that looks like they know how to play together. I want to see a team that, yeah, like, you know, a 60-yard bomb from Dante Moore to DeCorian Moore would be awesome. But like, I'm more concerned about like how does some of those short yardage stuff work that we've seen Oregon rely on so much over the last 3 years in the Will Stein offense. Just those kind of quick efficiency, get the chains moving types of plays. And, you know, that's kind of the type of thing that you saw them lack early in the season last year. You know, they played Idaho to start last season, and that was a game that was close until the fourth, or I mean, it was close until the end. And Montana State's a better team than that Idaho team was last year, which still isn't an excuse. Oregon should probably win this game by 4 or 5 touchdowns if you want to just go on paper. So I think it's just, you know, looking like the bones are there. You know, there's going to be, you know, some mistakes. There's going to be stuff that we can nitpick afterwards. But I just want to see this team come out and not struggle to put away a team that they really should put away.
This is Tyson Alger from the I-5 corridor and Lookout Eugene Springfield. Hang with us. All right, we'll continue here with Tyson Alger from the I-5 corridor and Lookout Eugene Springfield as we're previewing your Oregon Ducks for the 2025 season. Yes, Danny, that is your Oregon Ducks.
Absolutely not.
But let's get back in this, Tyson. Thanks for sticking with us for another round. I got some Dan Lanning questions that I want to ask you, and one is they're going to be kind of polar opposite questions. So bear with me a little bit here. With the new landscape of football and how there's so much parity, but there's more outs to win, more pathways to a national championship. I thought I heard somebody say this the other day. Is Dan Lanning maybe the best coach in Oregon since Bellotti?
Oh boy, that's a good one.
I know Chip's been to a natty or Helfrich, you know, and like they get close, but it feels like the last 4 years is kind of building towards that.
Yeah, I mean, like I think if you look at the trajectory, you could say that. You know, I also think like we got to remember that Chip Kelly went to 4 BCS bowl games in 4 years, and then the second year was in the national championship game. Like, you know, that's close to what Dan has accomplished, but Dan hasn't gotten to that point quite yet. And granted, the system has changed, and if it was set up like it was in the past, Oregon would have been in the national championship game last year. But I think it's very close. I think with the way that Dan has approached the job and kind of sold himself to the community and you know, the grass is damn green in Eugene thing, like that's stuff that Chip Kelly never did. Like Chip was the best high concentrated coach that Oregon's probably ever had in a 4-year period. But I don't think that he ever really tried to endear himself around Eugene all that much. And, you know, that might not have a ton of value in terms of X's and O's and wins and losses. But when you're talking about like a college football coach and somebody who's running a program, like I think that matters, because you did see that the instability of Kelly leaving left to about 10 years of limbo for the Ducks. And so I think having that stability matters. You know, if Dan wins, I think it's 10 games this year, he's going to pass Chip Kelly on the all-time Oregon wins list in the same amount of time. So, I mean, like it's definitely an argument to be made. But, yeah, I mean, like at this point, He's more valuable than Cristobal was. He was way more valuable than Willie Taggart. You know,
You and I are more valuable than Willie Taggart right now.
Yeah, and it turns out if you've watched the news this week, his former assistant coaches are still getting into a bit of trouble. Drink Pepsi, right? Anyways, yeah. So I think if Lanning kind of replicates, you know, at least the ballpark of success that he's had in the past, like he's going to be right up there with Bellotti in terms of reverence around here. And you know, his kids are just kind of getting into high school. Like I think he's going to be around for at least 4, 5, 6 more years. You know, he's got the long contract signed, and although we've seen those get broken before, like this is one of the few coaches that have come around Eugene that I actually kind of believe when they say, like, why would I go anywhere else? Because we are in an era of college football where if you have facilities, if you have support from boosters, if you have the athletic department all behind you, like there's no reason why you can't be a perennial contender. And I don't see a college football job anymore that Lanning would leave Oregon for.
I'll flip this on its head. It's a lot harder. I feel like it's a lot harder to win a national championship with NIL and transfer and all that stuff. But Oregon, you know, I don't think this year it's expectation of national championship or bust, but this program is getting there to every single year as a national championship or a bust situation. I'll ask the question for fun, hypothetical. What's the leash on Lanning? Like, when does this need to deliver?
You know, like when you're walking your dog, you can have like the short leash, or you can have the one where you press the button and they just keep going and going and going and going. Yeah, that's double that, and that's the leash that Lanning has right now. I just think that there's so many things that outside of the wins and the losses have the program heading in the right direction, whether it's Oregon's been at the forefront of like NIL and the organization on that NIL front for so long. You know, the facilities, the recruiting, like there's a lot of good vibes around that program right now. So I understand kind of the national championship or bust expectations, and I do think that's kind of what left a little bit of a sour taste in last year's season, because it's just like you had the team, you had the experienced quarterback, you had the 13-0 record going into the championship game, and that was a very dramatic way of the season ending, and so I think there was definitely some frustrations there. But ultimately, like when you're talking about a program that saw the last guy leave for Miami, the guy before that leave for Florida State, and the guy before that get fired, the fact that Lanning's won like 85% of his games, I think he's got a pretty long leash here.
Last year, the Ducks had the scare against Idaho State. Are there any potential issues that you're looking at right now? Because last year was the offensive line, the center issues, and kind of trying to figure some stuff out there. Is there anything in the first couple weeks of the season where you're sitting there looking at it going, look, Oregon has recruits, they've got depth, they've got talent, some of it proven, some of it unproven. Is there anything that you're watching early on going, this should be good or this should be great, but I need to see it?
It's going to be basically the trenches. Oregon's offense. The reason the Ducks struggled those first 2 games of the season last year is because they were still shuffling lots around. They were coming off of a unexpected injury to Matthew Bedford, and they were just kind of trying to figure out who went where. And if you don't have a good line playing, like that's kind of like one of the easiest equalizing factors in the football game. And so I think that's why they struggled against Idaho, and they struggled against Boise State, which in retrospect turns out to be not that, embarrassing of a struggle considering they made it to the playoffs. But I do think Oregon's line is going to be better this year. I think like a player like Isaiah World is going to be a first-round draft pick next May or April, whenever the draft comes around. And so it's just a matter of, if those guys can get off to a little bit better of a start than the group did last year when they were still reshuffling things around, like I think that can take care of the rest. Because especially when you're playing teams that are like weaker than you across the field in terms of talent, like as long as you can get Dante time and get some of those receivers time to kind of get their timing and their patterns going, I think that's going to be a huge factor for them.
We'll get you out on this. What's your realistic expectation for Oregon this year? Plain and simple.
10 wins. 10 wins.
10 wins in playoff?
Yeah, I think 10 wins. I think playoff. I don't think they're going to be like a team that's flirting with like a bye in the playoff, or that comes in with the same fanfare as they did last year. But then again, we saw how well it works out for the teams that kind of come in under the radar last year. So I think 10 wins is fair with the level of talent they have with the relatively easy schedule, but it wouldn't surprise me if, it's 9, and, I probably wouldn't be shocked if it's 11 either. Like, I just think there's a decent window on this team, or a decent range on this team in terms of floor and ceiling.
If they, yeah, I'm with you that I don't think they're buy necessarily material, but do you got to win a game in the playoff, or do you think that would just be bonus for kind of how this season is built?
Oh boy, that's a good question. Like, if the Ducks come into the playoffs with like momentum, like let's say they lose the Penn State game and then they just rattle off a rest of the season full of wins after that, I kind of think they need to show something in the playoffs, just because of like how disappointing it was last year. I mean, I'm still kind of in shock at the build up to that Oregon Ohio State game, and I thought Ohio State was going to win that, but the fact that it was like 35-3 or whatever it was at halftime, like that left such like an incomplete feeling around the Oregon fan base and everything. So I just think it would be tough for them to get into the playoff again and then to again not have kind of something to show for it. But we'll see when we get there.
He's Tyson Alger, I-5 corridor. Look out, Eugene, Springfield. Thank you for your time, my friend. We'll catch you next week, and we'll see if we feel better, if we feel worse, or what the team looked like.
Thanks, guys. Much appreciated.
Yeah, that's Tyson Alger. You'll catch him every single Wednesday right here on the Firm at 10:30 throughout the Ducks season. You can also catch every Ducks football game here on the Fan Sports Network, pregame, postgame, during everything you need, plus the coaches show, Insider, etc. 1080, home of the Ducks, 105.1 The Fan.